Ever heard the phrase experimental science? Okay, sure. We've all got those images of labs and beakers, right? But what about applying that experimental approach not just to test tubes, but to our own lives?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what we're diving into today. We're digging into this source material that's all about personal growth. You could almost think of it like an ancient self-help guide, And it throws out this really radical idea. It's not enough to just read about life to truly learn and grow. You've got to actually live it.
I like it.
Right. So get ready, because we're about to unpack this whole idea of the experimental science of the soul. Sounds kind of deep, right? But trust me, stick with us. Even if you're not really into the ancient wisdom thing, you might just find some surprisingly relevant nuggets in here for your own life.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this text, it doesn't waste any time, It comes right out and says, look, books, lectures, they're all great, but they'll only get you so far.
Right.
It's like they're dropping this truth bomb, right? Saying that traditional learning, as we often think of it, it actually has its limits. What do you think about that?
Well, it makes you think. I mean, it's all about this concept that true, deep understanding, that real wisdom, it comes from experience.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. Anyone can pick up a relationship advice book, right?
Right. Tons of those.
But it's the actual navigating of a real relationship with all its ups and downs, its complexities. That's where the real learning takes place. Yeah. It's in those challenges, the decisions you make, the mistakes you might make along the way. That's where the real growth happens.
That makes a lot of sense.
And you can see that reflected in all areas of life, even in modern learning theories, Yeah. The idea of experiential learning, where you're actively engaged, is far more powerful than just passively absorbing information.
Absolutely. It's like we all have those lessons that we learned the hard way. We probably remember those the best, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of lessons, this text puts a lot of emphasis on listening to a higher power for guidance, which, might not resonate with everyone, but I think we can reframe that a bit for a more modern context. Like, what if we think about it as tuning into our intuition, those gut feelings, or even just paying close attention to the feedback that life throws our way, especially when things get a little rough?
Yeah, totally.
But the question is, how do we actually do that in today's world, right? We're bombarded with distractions, constantly on the go. How do we quiet the noise and actually hear that inner voice?
Well, it all comes down to being present, practicing mindfulness. And I don't mean you have to go sit on a mountaintop somewhere, right?
All right.
It's about bringing that awareness into your everyday life. Be present with your thoughts, your reactions, the choices you're making. It's about noticing patterns in your experiences, both the good and the bad. And as you start to pay attention, you start to see those lessons emerge more clearly. And that allows you to make choices that are more in line with your values, what you truly want.
I like that. It's like we become scientists of our own lives, always observing, experimenting, adjusting our approach based on what we're learning.
Precisely.
So cool. This text also talks about this idea called a theology of virtue, but not in like a preachy way. It's more like your actions. They're the real test of your beliefs. So how do you see this theology in action? It's living out your values, playing out in our everyday lives.
It's that classic saying, actions speak louder than words. It's one thing to say we believe in things like honesty, kindness, integrity, but how are those values actually showing up in our day-to-day interactions? Each choice, no matter how big or small, becomes this opportunity to really embody those virtues.
Yeah.
And then we learn from the outcomes, refine our approach as we go.
Right, because it's a process.
It's a continuous journey of learning and growth, but through action, not just thinking about it.
I love that. It's like this constant feedback loop. And speaking of taking things a step further, I came across this amazing analogy in the text. It compares knowledge without experience to dough without leaven. It's like flat, dense, kind of sad, right?
Right. Missing something.
Exactly. So how do we add that leaven, that magic ingredient, to help our learning truly rise?
This is where that experimental part really comes into play. It's about taking that knowledge that you're gathering, whether it's from books, from this deep dive, from wherever, and actually doing something with it.
Yeah, put it into practice.
Exactly. Teach it to someone else. Maybe you have a project you've been putting off, but it relates to what you're learning. Now's the time to tackle it. Even just taking the time to reflect on how this new knowledge, this new perspective, changes how you see the world around you, that can make a huge difference, because it's about actively engaging with what you're learning instead of letting it just sit there gathering dust in your mind. That's how you move from just having information to truly understanding and embodying it.
That's a great point. So to wrap up our deep dive today, the big takeaway is this. Real understanding, real growth. It doesn't come from just passively reading or listening. It's about taking that knowledge, taking those ideas, and applying them in your own life and seeing what happens, making adjustments along the way, right? It's becoming an experimenter of your own life.
Exactly. Your life is the laboratory.
Perfectly said. And as we leave you today, here's something to ponder. What's one area in your own life where maybe you could use a little more of that experimental science approach? What knowledge have you been holding on to that's feeling a bit like unrisen dough? Maybe it's time to take it out, add some life to it, and see what amazing things can happen.
I love that.
Think about it, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.